Pakistan's new Prime Minister-elect Imran Khan is all set to make key decisions regarding his new cabinet appointments. Reports state that the party's top brass has made decisions with regard to the names of candidates for the post in Punjab, Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and the centre. After wrapping up its mammoth general elections, Pakistan is set to gear up for its presidential elections. The presidential polls are likely to begin a little before Pakistan President Manmoon Hussein's 5-year term comes to an end on September 8 this year. Pakistan on Wednesday dismissed the United States' concerns about fresh IMF funding for South Asia being used for repaying Chinese debt as totally wrong. Earlier this week, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo had warned against any potential IMF bailout funds for Pakistan's incoming government being used to pay off Chinese lenders. Beijing has pledged $57 billion in loans for Pakistan as part of China's vast Belt and Road Initiative, extending the economic and diplomatic ties between the two countries. The annual State of the Climate report, compiled by more than 450 scientists from over 60 countries, states that the world saw a dramatic increase in greenhouse gases in 2017. The report further stated that the annual global average carbon dioxide concentration at the Earth's surface climbed to 405 parts per million, which is the highest in the modern atmospheric measurement records that date back as far as 800,000 years. It also stated that the global growth rate of CO2 has nearly quadrupled since the early 1960s. As the northern belt continues to be lashed by heavy rains in India, the temple town of Varanasi remains flooded. Heavy rainfall has led to a flood-like situation at the banks of Ganges. Several community places, banks and temples remain flooded throughout Tuesday, throwing normal life out of gear. A wildfire dubbed the Milepost 90 fire in Washington in the U.S. has now covered 11,000 acres. More than 50 homes are threatened by the blaze and the evacuation orders were issued by authorities. The wildfire, which was first reported on Tuesday, is now estimated to be 30% contained. Zimbabwe's peaceful phase after its first democratic election post the removal of autocrat leader Robert Mugabe ended as 3 people were killed in protest following the election results. Clashes began when the army opened fire in central Harare during demonstrations over alleged fraud in the country's elections. Family and friends of Chileans who went missing during the dictatorship of Augusto Pinochet protested outside the Supreme Court today against a recent court decision to release perpetrators of human rights crimes in the Pinochet area. Pinochet came to power after a military coup between 1973 and remained in power until 1990 under his regime. An estimated 3,000 people were kidnapped and killed and 28,000 were tortured. Ban on garments covering the face, such as the full face veil used by Muslim women, came into effect in Denmark today. However, hundreds took to the streets in the capital of Copenhagen to protest a decision which is also popularly known as burqa ban. The Danish government maintained that the ban was enforced to take a stand against political Islam and fundamentalist groups and not personal freedom. In Chile, clashes broke out between police forces and student protesters. Students took to the streets to voice their discontent about the conservative government's youth labor project. The critics of the government's proposal say that the proposal will limit their opportunities to enter the workforce in search of full-time employment as they try and launch their career. As South Africa celebrates Women's Month this August and National Women's Day on August 9th, hundreds of women have decided to take to the streets and march in protest of violence against women and children under the total shutdown banner. South Africa faces one of the highest rates of crimes against women. The country's femicide rate is 5 times more than the global average. Staff at the Eiffel Tower walked out on strike on Wednesday in a dispute over lengthening queues at the Paris landmark, forcing it to close during the peak summer tourist season. The new system, which from July has reserved separate lifts for different types of ticket holders, was exhausting for the staff who had to deal with frustrated tourists. Eight years after the war in Syria erupted, the road to Syria's border crossing with Jordan has finally reopened. The Nasib crossing became ready for use after government forces retrieved the rebel-held territory. After its capture, billions of dollars in annual trade moves through the crossing before fighting erupted in 2011, and its closure has cost the country and its neighbors. In Saudi Arabia, 2 more women's rights activists have been arrested. The 2 women, Sama al-Badawi and Nasima al-Sada, are vocal advocates for advocacy for women's equality and have campaigned to end the kingdom's male guardianship system, which requires women to obtain the consent of a male relative for major decisions. Just last month, the country finally lifted its archaic law that banned women from driving. These arrests are at odds with the progressive image that the country has been trying to portray internationally. Afghanistan announced that it will hold presidential elections on April 20, 2019 for the 4th time since the Taliban were toppled from power in 2001. However, election officials remain wary of the security arrangements that will entail conducting polls in Taliban territories. Currently, almost 14% or 56 of more than 400 districts are fully controlled by the Taliban, while another 30% are contested. At least 15 people were killed on Tuesday in Afghanistan's eastern city of Jalalabad when gunmen stormed a government building, trapping dozens inside after a suicide bomber blew himself up at the entrance gate. There was no immediate claim of responsibility. The attack specifically targeted the compound of the Refugees and Repatriations Department. It ended after more than 5 hours of intense fighting between militants and security forces. Spokesman for the governor of Nangarhar province. As Nicaragua spirals further into chaos and instability, many residents of the Central American country are choosing to leave the country and go to Costa Rica. As many as 17,400 applications for refugee status were presented to the Costa Rican government this month. The unrest began in April when President Daniel Ortega proposed reducing pension benefits to cover a budget shortfall. Protesters took to the streets and clashes between security forces and protesters have killed 273 so far. Israel would deploy its military if Iran were to try to block the Bab al-Mandeb Strait that links the Red Sea to the Gulf of Aden, said Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu today. Saudi Arabia and Iran are in a 3-year-old proxy war in Yemen, which lies on the southern side of Bab al-Mandeb. Threats to the strait could mean blocking of ships that carry 4.8 million barrels per day of crude oil and products flow through it. Social networking giants Facebook and Instagram have introduced the time limit tool on their platforms to tackle social media addiction. Users now have access to an activity dashboard that will help control how they spend time online. The company said it developed these tools based on collaboration and inspiration from leading mental health experts and organizations. A new report jointly published on Monday by the World Health Organization and UNICEF observed that an estimated 78 million newborns have a highest risk of death each year from not drinking their mother's milk within the first hours of being born. The report was published to coincide with the Breastfeeding Week and aims to raise awareness about the benefits of breastfeeding. Researchers from the Australian University of Monash claim that for the first time an entire city has been protected from the viral disease dengue. A breakthrough was made when captive bred mosquitoes with a naturally occurring bacteria were released in the city of Townsville, where they mated with the local mosquitoes by spreading the bacteria Wolbachia, which hinders dengue transmission. The city has been dengue-free since 2014. Investigators sifting through the wreckage of the Aeromexico passenger jet on Wednesday located the plane's flight recorders, which may have clues about what caused the Aeromexico plane to crash. Dozens of people were injured on Tuesday as an Aeromexico plane crashed in Mexico's Durango state shortly after takeoff. In an escalation of the ongoing trade war between the U.S. and China, U.S. officials said that they may raise tariffs on 200 billion Chinese goods to 25%. Reports state that President Donald Trump asked the U.S. Trade Representative to consider increasing the proposed tariffs to 25% from the announced 10%. The slapping of tariff is part of the ongoing attempts to pressure Beijing to reform its trade practices. U.S. President Donald Trump appealed to Attorney General Jeff Sessions to end an investigation into Russia's role in the 2016 U.S. general elections. The appeal drew criticism from his fellow Republicans in Congress, who said the probe must go on. In a series of tweets, Trump called the idea of his campaign working with Russia a total hoax. After North Korea's goodwill gesture of returning the human remains of American soldiers from the 1953 Korean War, a ceremony was held in South Korea to mark the repatriation of the soldiers' bodies. The coffins draped in UN flags will now make their way to the United States. The repatriation efforts came after an agreement reached at a landmark summit between North Korea leader Kim Jong-un and U.S. President Donald Trump in June. Thieves in Sweden stole 2 crowns and an orb from the Swedish royal family's collection and escaped in a motorboat. The priceless artifacts were snatched from the cathedral in Strängnäs after robbers broke into a glass case that held the 17th century funeral insignia of King Carl IX and his wife Queen Christina. The robbers then made their exit in a motorboat and that was waiting just a couple of 100 meters away on a lake. No arrests have been made so far. Afghanistan National Circus begins its annual circus performance in Kabul. The circus performance will run for 8 days with the circus teams performing in different parts of Kabul. People in San Salvador take part in festivities marking the start of the city's patron saints festival. The festivities start with a colorful procession of dancers and actors in the capital, San Salvador. The festivities, which take place under the surveillance of the police and army personnel, include parades, children's events, carnivals and sporting events, in which the mayor of San Salvador invests $476,000. Bollywood legend Shah Rukh Khan's 18-year-old daughter Suhana has featured on the cover of the August edition of Vogue India. In her first ever magazine cover, she shows Suhana wearing an Emilio Pucci dress, which was unveiled by Shah Rukh at the Vogue Beauty Awards 2018. Suhana, who is currently studying in London, had previously expressed her wish to be an actress.